A handful of ashes. The town of Harlow had always been too quiet. It was the kind of place that you didn't notice when you were passing through. One of those towns that felt like it had been forgotten by time. Or maybe it was the town that had forgotten time. That was the thought on Daniel's mind as he drove into town, the old Dodge Dart humming beneath him like a tired old dog. Harlow, nestled between the mountains like an abandoned relic, seemed untouched by the world. The roads hadn't been repaved in decades. The buildings sagged in on themselves like they were holding a deep secret, the kind you could only whisper into the darkness at night. But the air, thick with something unspoken, was the worst part. It was as if the place had been cursed since its founding. And maybe it had been. Daniel hadn't cared much for small towns when he was a kid, and he cared even less now. His grandfather, Earl, had passed away quietly in his sleep. Daniel hadn't been close with him, not really. But when you got the call that someone in your family had died, even if you hadn't spoken to them in years, you made the trip. Settling the estate, the lawyer had said, but Daniel wasn't sure what there was to settle. The old man had lived in the same house for decades, a place so run down that the walls seemed to sag under the weight of all the years it had witnessed. The family had money, enough to make sure the old man never had to worry about anything. But what had Earl left behind? A handful of ashes, a handful of secrets, and a pile of things that didn't matter anymore. The house sat at the edge of town, just past the old cemetery where the wind never seemed to stop whispering. It was a two-story relic of Victorian architecture, once grand but now weather-beaten and tired. The lawn was overgrown, the shutters flapping in the wind like they were trying to escape the house. The front door creaked when Daniel pushed it open, an eerie sound that felt too loud in the quiet of the world. Inside, the house smelled like dust and something older, something rotting. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and every step Daniel took on the creaky floors seemed to echo. It was cold, colder than he expected, especially for a day in the middle of spring. He walked past the front hallway, through the living room, and into the kitchen. His footsteps stirred up little clouds of dust in the air, the kind that danced in the shafts of weak sunlight pouring through the cracked windows. Nothing had changed since he'd last been here as a child. The same old chairs, the same crooked table, the same black and white checkered floor that seemed to mock you with its stale patterns. The house looked the same, but there was something wrong with it, something that crawled beneath the surface. Daniel could feel it in the way the shadows seemed to stretch a little longer than they should. The air was thick, like something invisible was holding its breath, waiting. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the chill. "Pull yourself together, Dan," he muttered, as if the house could hear him.
The first thing he did was look around for anything that needed to be packed up or sorted. He'd been told that Earl had lived alone for years, that there was nothing of value left. But there had to be something, right? Something that had kept Earl tied to this place for so long. Daniel found the old man's study first, the door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers scattered across the floor, bookshelves half collapsed, a desk piled high with old letters, photographs, and yellowed notes. One of the photographs caught Daniel's eye. It was of his grandfather, a much younger man, standing in front of the house. But what struck Daniel wasn't the image of Earl, it was the background. There, just beyond the house, was a figure in the distance. A dark shape, barely visible, standing in the yard. Daniel leaned in closer to examine it, but as soon as he blinked, the figure was gone. Shaking his head, he placed the photograph back on the desk. Maybe he was just tired from the long drive. Maybe it was just the house getting to him. He turned around, intending to go back downstairs, but something made him pause. There was a low hum, a sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It wasn't the house settling. It was something else. Something older, deeper. Suddenly, from upstairs, a loud crash echoed through the house. A door slammed open and shut, and then there was silence. "Grandpa?" Daniel called, his voice too loud in the heavy air. But of course, there was no answer. He was alone. He had to be. The passage of time, As he continued through the house, something strange began to happen. Objects, familiar objects, started to shift, like something from the past was bleeding into the present. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, which had stopped years ago, suddenly ticked again. Daniel glanced up, feeling a jolt of unease, but the clock wasn't moving. It was frozen, but the sound continued, echoing in his ears. He walked into the living room, where his grandfather's old armchair sat in the corner. It was empty now, but as he stared at it, he could have sworn he saw a figure sitting there. His grandfather, the way he used to be. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make his skin crawl. And then the voices started. Faint at first, whispers from somewhere in the house, coming from all directions at once. The words were indecipherable, a jumble of sounds, like distant cries for help. The hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stood up as he turned in a circle, looking for the source of the noise. He felt like he was losing his grip on reality. The walls of the house felt like they were shifting. He couldn't be sure if he was hearing things or if the house was changing, folding into itself. At the base of the stairs, he stopped. A voice, clear, unmistakable, called his name. Daniel. It was his grandfather's voice, but that wasn't possible. Earl had been dead for hours now. Still, Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He turned toward the stairs, his legs unwilling to move. But then, something else caught his eye. A shadow moving at the edge of his vision, stretching long across the floor like a dark stain. The shadow was tall, almost human, but there was something wrong about it. Something that made his stomach twist in dread. The whispers grew louder, no longer words, but frantic shouts, pleading voices calling from beyond the grave. Help us, please. Without thinking, Daniel bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. He yanked at the handle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The house wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by time itself, by the bargain his family had made, a deal that had tied them to this cursed place, binding them to something ancient, something evil. And now, it was time to pay. End of part 1. Thanks for watching GamingCMX channel.